All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Dan Vega, and welcome to another episode of Spring Office Hours. With me, as always, is my host, my friend, DaShaun Carter. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm so glad that
Good.
we're able to do this every single week. It's the thing that I look forward to the most. Little secret: I'm actually on vacation, but I didn't want to miss spring office hours, so here we
I
are
could see that. Different location, not that fancy new background that you got on the road.
on the road.
Cool. Well, today we have a fun episode. We are calling this Mailbag. We attempted to do this last week, but we had so many in the chat asking us questions that we answered all of those questions and never got to any of our mailbag questions. So we're going to attempt to do it again, but do not let that persuade you. If you have questions, please go ahead and ask them in the chat and we'll see if we can't get to them.
It's the best part of the show.
It is. It is. So what's going on in your world? Anything exciting?
Yeah, we're hitting the hills. I'm from Kansas City. The sports ball team there won the Super Bowl over the weekend, and we decided we're just going to take the week off. So now we're going to go snowboarding. None of us have really ever done the snowboarding on anything more than like a 20-foot hill. So
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah, I've never
Good to see
snowboarded
friendly
in my life.
faces.
It seems like it would be a lot of fun. I don't know if I'm athletic enough to be able to do it, but hello, Simon.
Yes,
Thanks for joining us.
we had a great crew. Welcome back. Welcome back. Let us know where you're coming in from in the chat, and we'll pop it up. It's always just fun to see where everybody's from all over the world. We're at a new time today, trying to squeeze it in. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a little bit a different reach. We'll have a different audience a little bit.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share. Oh, actually, I'm not going to share my screen yet. I need to change some resolution here.
Awesome.
All right.
So we've been
So
keeping busy. We've been keeping
yeah,
busy outside of office
we
hours.
have
We've been
two.
keeping busy.
Yeah, we have two over here. My one daughter was sick all last week. Finally got better on Saturday. Sunday she was great. Sunday night, the other daughter gets sick, and here we are again. Another week of sickness in the house. I'm ready for winter to be over. Can't stand it. I mean, I like it as we get into winter, but now, like in February, is just the worst. It's like, I just want to get out of this. I want to get into some nice weather. I want to be able to run, outside. So I'm looking forward to the winter days being over with.
Excellent. People coming in from all
Cool.
over the world,
Yeah, looks like
different
it.
time zones. We get it. Josh does tend to, stream a little bit later. He's also in a different time zone. Our
Yeah.
team is spread out all over the world. So yeah,
Yep.
we're trying to cover the bases.
Yep. All right, before we get into mailbag, I'm just gonna share a couple things. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick. I just wanted to let everybody know. So DaShaun and I we were at one of the Spring One Essentials watch parties in San Francisco. We talked about it on an episode a couple weeks ago. The recordings from Spring One Essentials are now up. So if you weren't able to catch them, you can go to spring1.io and check out all the recordings, all the sessions from that virtual conference. Really just a ton of great content. So go ahead and check that out if you missed any of those. Do you have any that kind of stuck out to you, DaShaun, that you really enjoyed?
You know, uh, my favorites. The one that's probably up on the screen is probably one of the favorites. I also liked
Yep.
Cora and Greg talking about the internal developer portal. That
Yep.
still is kind of resonating with me quite a bit. So yeah, there's
Yep.
tons of great stuff.
Yeah, there's some, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but there was a couple sessions on authorization server and just authorization
Oh yeah,
server
yeah.
1.0, which got released. And
The
so I'm excited
observability
to go
team,
back and watch the recording on that.
Jonathan and Martin and Thomas, their observability one was awesome.
Yep. Yep.
I
Cool.
just like the way they delivered it.
So that is the Spring One Essentials recordings. They're up. Go ahead and check them out. The golden path to Spring One. So this is really cool. We're doing a bunch of virtual talks leading up to VMware Explore, which is also going to have a bunch of Spring content this year. So I don't know if everybody's heard that news. We'll start talking about that more. CFP for that should be opening soon. But as we lead up to this conference in August, which has moved to Las Vegas, I don't know if you know this, DaShaun, but you cannot spell Vegas without Vega. So
I heard that somewhere. You cannot
I will be
spell
there.
Vegas without Vega.
So we have a bunch of talks leading up to VMware Explore. So this is every Tuesday and Thursday at 2
Yes.
p.m. Eastern. And you can go ahead and look at all of the upcoming talks. Again, these are virtual. They are free. You can go ahead and check them out. Our friend Thomas Vitale. Oh, can't wait to watch that one. Our friend of the show, Matt Rabel. Marco Beeler. Love Marco. Marco Codes. A whole bunch of really great speakers and talks coming up. So definitely check out that lineup. You can find that over on the Tanzu Developer Center. And then, as always, we like to check out the calendar.spring.io. This is the kind of release calendar of what is happening in our world. Today, Tuesday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone out there. And happy Valentine's Day at Spring, because wow, do we have a lot of releases.
Yes,
so
it's amazing.
A lot around Reactor, which is really cool to see. So a lot happening in Reactor. Micrometer, there were a few releases yesterday. We have a big one tomorrow. Spring Framework 6.0.5, maybe not a big one, but a release candidate or a minor release with some bug fixes. So check that out. And some things coming up, Spring Data release at the end of the week. I saw the Spring Data team all got together in Boston this week and kind of put their heads together and plan the future of Spring Data. So that was exciting to see through the eyes of our friend Greg Turnquist. So exciting to see what the Spring Data team has in store for us. So lots of great stuff this week. Anything you want to kind of dive into there?
Nothing really, nothing standing out. I'm really excited to get into the mailbag.
Yeah, me too. Let's go ahead and do that. So do we have any questions so far here?
None.
All right. So let me get into, again, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. We will go ahead and jump into our mailbag. I have, should we put these up on screen first and then?
No, just talking.
Yeah, let's see if we have, okay, so here's a good one. Hi, Dan. My name is Mahir. I'm one of your subscribers on YouTube. Your videos are really great and helpful. Thank you. I have a question for you. This could be for both of us here because we are both in this world, but I'm looking for a new laptop for development, and I know you're a big fan of Apple products. Can you help me out? I have a budget for a MacBook Air. Should I go for the M1 base model with 256 gigs or the latest M2 base model with 256 gigs? Your suggestions would be helpful. Any thoughts on that?
I kind of approach buying laptops with a budget, and then I just try to maximize that budget. What can I get for this amount of money? But it's been the same budget since 1990s. $1,000. What can I get for $1,000? And that's what I go and get.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say my answer to that is, don't worry about always getting the highest end models. Like, again, as DaShaun said, you have a budget for a reason. Try to stick to that budget. And I would say don't get swayed by the higher end model numbers because they're not always for what you are doing. So now I know in my case, I do reach for a little bit higher end of a model because I do a lot of video editing and producing, a lot of video work on there. And so having that extra graphics cores to do that kind of graphics editing, that really helps me out. But again, that's my situation. If all you're using it for is kind of a development laptop, then I would say, more RAM, the better, because if you're doing a lot of things at one time, that helps out. The SSD drives help because, you want to be writing to those drives. That's very fast. So yeah, find a budget, stick to it, and I think you'll be okay. You can't go wrong with the new M1s, M2s, Airs, even the desktop one. What I can't remember. Mac Minis, those are great too. So
Mac Studios. Yeah. Oh, the Mac. Oh, yeah. The new Mac Mini. I saw something where the new Mac Mini's got so much packed into it. It is almost like a Mac Studio.
Wow. Yeah. Oh yeah. You can like upgrade it to almost get to like a Mac Studio. So yeah, they're kind of blurring the lines there. Cool.
Oh, 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 what a way to start the day. Thanks a lot for the help, DaShaun. We deployed this morning the SOAP stuff that we worked on a couple weeks ago to production, and it's working flawlessly.
Wow, that's awesome.
That is
That is
awesome.
definitely a win. Awesome
Yeah,
news.
that's awesome.
Let me see. I got a question here. Hello there. Are microservices necessary to learn as a Java developer? So as a Java developer, I don't know that the answer to that, it really depends as always. If you are trying to get a job doing Java development and Spring or whatever framework you're using. And a lot of the jobs that you're looking at have a requirement of, hey, you need experience with microservices, then yes, that is something you should learn. If your company is moving to a more microservice based architecture and that's something that you need to learn to complete your job, then yeah, that's something you need to learn. If this is there are plenty of companies out there who still have really great apps that are monolithic applications and they're doing very well. And so if that's the case, stick with what you know. So it really depends on what your end goal is. If it's something you just want to learn, then I think it's a good skill to have. So
But it's not necessary, not required. You don't have to learn
right.
microservices in order to be a Java developer.
Right. Cool. Let me see here. I tried to create a reusable component that sets up my test data and I can compare to, see, I always didn't like testing because setting up all the objects took forever.
Have you heard of test containers? Have you seen the light? Have you seen test containers? This is a great way to, stand up, tear down data services for testing. That's where I'll start. Is if you've seen that, then that's a good pattern to start with.
Cool. Yeah, I like it. I'm a little confused on the question, but if you have some more detail, we'd be happy to take a look at that again. A couple episodes ago, you mentioned you had some Raspberry Pis laying around
I
and
have
you
a
were
few.
thinking about clustering them. Did you have a chance to tinker with them yet?
Yeah. So regarding Raspberry Pis, I still today have 92 Raspberry Pis. That number is going to decrease before it increases again. I am getting rid of the Raspberry Pi 0 version 1. I'm going to give those away. But I have clustered them. I cluster using various, I've used microcates, I've used K3s, and I've actually done vanilla Kubernetes the hard way with Raspberry Pis. So yes, I do use the Raspberry Pis with Kubernetes clustering. I've also used Mesos with those. So yeah, it's awesome. It's fun, but it's much like my neighbor who likes to work in his car. During the week, the car is up on blocks and the hood is open, but on the weekends, he takes it out for a drive. That's the same way that my Raspberry Pis work. I'm usually tinkering with them during the week, and then on the weekends, I do some fun project, and then I start all over for the next week.
Cool. That's
Another
crazy. 92.
Simon, have you seen Cloud Test Containers by Atomic Kumar? Yes,
Cool.
yes, I have, and I actually I have a website, a blog, DaShaun.com, where you can kind of see a bunch of the projects I've done with Raspberry Pis, and there's also a project in there where I use Test Container Cloud in order to generate native images. So I offload that native image processing to Test Container Cloud. Yes, I'm a fan.
Cool. All right, let me dip back into the mailbag. I'll just go ahead and read this one. Dear Dan, I hope you and your family are doing well. Thank you. I'm a self-taught Java developer, and I'm seeking guidance on the essential skills I need to learn and secure a job in the industry. Great question. I'm already familiar with Spring Boot. I was wondering if you could offer some advice on what specifically is crucial for me to learn, taking into consideration my knowledge of Spring Boot. So I think that's a great question. People, people want to learn Spring for different reasons. One of which is obviously to land a job in the industry. So my take on this is you've kind of said that you've already have some experience with Spring. I would ask you, how much experience do you have with it? Because I think if you have some intermediate experience with Java and some basic knowledge of Spring, you should be able to get a job in the industry working with Java and Spring. Now, it just really depends on exactly what type of job you're trying to get. And as I said before, if we're doing kind of resume driven development, as you were, start with the job boards. What are companies looking for? So if it doesn't say just Spring, if it says like experience building REST APIs or experience with GraphQL or microservices, if they're looking for specific things, then I would say that is an opportunity to touch upon those skills. So gain those skills, produce some work behind those skills. Build your portfolio out. Have a GitHub repository that shows off some of these projects that you're working on. So again, take what always start at the ending position. Where do I want to get to? I want to get this job right here that has these requirements, and work your way backwards.
Excellent. I think I would take a slightly different approach. I feel that one of the big values of Spring Boot is its ability to be ready for production right away. So if you're going down that path, using Spring Boot already, the things that I would encourage everybody to understand is the observability that you can get out of the box, the production-ready features that you can get out of the box. So you have to be able to understand the actuator and what it can deliver for you. So if you're looking for something to dig into, I would recommend digging into the actuator and what it can do for you in production.
Cool. All right, we got a question here from Vernon. Hi guys, can you give me advice on multiple OAuth services, Spring Security configuration? For example, users can sign up in an app with their Google, MSN, and other user credentials. Yeah, so this is built into Spring Security. So you can have your normal form login. So I have a form login where I enter my username and my password. And then you can have OAuth 2 support where, hey, I want to log in with Google. I want to log in with GitHub. Whatever accounts that you want to have made available in your application, you can do so. There are a lot of ones built in right into the OAuth 2 support. All you got to do is provide your credentials, like say for Google, what is your secret, your client key, etc. You enter that in, and right out of the box with Spring Security, that should work.
Yep, and there is a guide. I couldn't find it off the top of my head, but there's a guide. It was written by David Sire that does have the multiple OAuth options in it. I think it demonstrates Google and Facebook plus the form login. So it's got two OAuth providers on the back end plus the regular form login. So look for that on spring.io.
Cool, and that's a really good idea for some content I can create. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, what do you guys think? You guys know about data structures and algorithms? Will it make us good developer, or will it sharpen our logic as a developer? I mean, is it useful? DaShaun, you want to take this first?
Great question. I often find myself wondering, like, hey, am I spending enough time working on my algorithms, working on my data structures? Am I spending enough time practicing those skills? And I found that where I'm at and where I'm going to deliver the most value is a little bit higher than that. So yes, those are good skill sets to have. It depends on what you're trying to do, right? If you're delivering features and you're needing that type of skill set, every rep counts. So if you want to get better at something, do more of it, and that's how you're going to move forward. But it depends on where you are in your journey. So depending on where you are, that's going to make the difference on whether you should spend more time doing algorithms and data structures or not.
Yep. And if you want to get into, a FANG company, one of the top companies, a lot of them still use those type of data structure and algorithm question interviews. So you better be prepared for that. I also think that even if you're not going into FANG, these are questions that you can work on in your own time and not have to stress out about, because I think they just kind of help us, as DaShaun said, put in the reps. And at the end of the day, you're doing problem solving, and problem solving is the biggest skill that we can have as developers. So the more of those kind of scenarios that you're going through and training your brain to go, okay, how would I solve this issue? Even though I'm not writing a binary tree sort in my everyday job, it still puts you through the rep of like having to solve that problem. So I still think they're pretty useful. It's not something you need to like spend every waking moment of every single day on. If you're trying to get a job in the industry of like building web applications, spend time building web applications. Okay, I don't see any more questions in here. So back to the mailbag. We need like an animation with like the mailman running across the screen. Let me see what I can find here.
While you mentioned that, I do have my kids helping me out with some graphics and artwork. My daughter is actually
Nice.
pinging me right now. I'm like, hey, yeah, little bumpers and thumbnails and motion graphics. So yeah, stay tuned for that.
All right. I think let me just read through this and see if this is a good candidate. So, hey, I'm a junior Java developer from Nigeria. I'm a year into tech. I refer to myself as a junior. I want to build a project that could help me get my first job, but I haven't been able to finish it yet. This is because I don't understand how to integrate payment, especially using advanced APIs. Could you help me out or give me some pointers to sharing any project that you've done similar? So I would say that if you're just trying to get your first job, I don't know that integrating a payment solution is a requirement. If it's something that you want to work on because you're building something that is integrating payments, I completely understand that. I would say to check out some services like Stripe. Stripe makes it really easy to do. That's probably the first place that I look. I mentioned Marco earlier. Marco Codes. He has. I remember watching a tutorial that he did on. I think it was on his channel, where he integrated Stripe into just kind of a normal. I think it was a Java and a Spring Boot application. So I would maybe check that out. But yeah, again, if you're just kind of building those skills, I don't think a payment solution is something that is a requirement. But yeah, just keep finding projects that you want to work on, and those failure opportunities where like you try to do something and fail, I think those are where a lot of the biggest gains are. So keep at it. It's not easy. Just stick to it.
In integrating with payments, there's tons of APIs out there. Pick one. Most of them have some Spring onboarding or SDK that's going to help you out moving forward to Spring. But if you've got specific questions, also just a reminder, reach out. Let us know what you're having problems with, and maybe we can help.
All right, I got a question here in chat from Simon. With the rise of OpenAI, Bard, do you envision a project like Spring AI popping up akin to Spring Cloud, or too much variance? Yeah, so I would say you never know. I mean, we'll see what the future holds, but I know I just did a video on ChatGPT building a Spring Boot application, and there was some still human intervention on my part, but it did a really good job in a few areas. One, I think it does a really good job of kind of give me a high level tasks list of the things I would need to do to like build a REST API in Spring Boot, right? So it lays those out for you. And then based on those, you can drill farther into those and get a whole bunch of really good answers. So yes, I don't know if it's a Spring project, but I know that AI is already here. It is already part of my kind of tool belt as a developer, things that I'm using on a daily basis. So I can only imagine that becomes more and more frequent across our industry.
I think, I've also been playing around, and if I think about what might come out of the Spring team, I don't expect it to be something like Spring Cloud. I would expect it to be perhaps more like Spring Data, where my models features, the different algorithms that I'm going to use might be abstracted a little bit and give me that flexibility between switching and maybe an ability of having a feature store, model store, etc. So yeah, it's very, very possible. It looks like it's trending in that direction. What that's going to look like, I'm not quite sure, but I think I'd lean more towards a Spring Data type of a ecosystem than a Spring Cloud one.
Great. Let me see. I have some more questions here. Do you have any experience building Chrome extensions? I do not. Do you?
No. No.
All right. I it'd be something fun to do, but no, I have not done it. So if you have any specific questions around that, let us know. We'll see if we can find some resources for you.
Yep. Every time I felt like I was going to go down that path, I've started down that path, but I've never taken it to completion. Every time I felt like I was going down that path, I always fell back and was writing a CLI.
Yeah, and I think speaking of kind of open AI and ChatGPT, this is another great like use case for AI. I haven't written a Chrome extension. I obviously use them. I know what they are. I know the languages that you can use to kind of build them in. Hey, ChatGPT, what are the steps to create my first Chrome extension? Right? Like I'm sure you're gonna get some great high level steps, and then take each of those and dig further into those. So if you haven't done that already, maybe try to give that a shot. Okay, another question here. Hi, is anyone aware of any open source projects which live in action and use the Spring microservice architecture? So yeah, there's actually a really good one out there. I'm sure everybody has seen the Spring Boot Pet Clinic at some point. This was a project that was used to kind of show off the features of Spring. This has been ported over to a microservices architecture. So if you go out there and look for Spring Boot Pet Clinic microservices, you will find this project. Really great representation of building microservices using Spring Boot.
Also, I'm working on Barbecue Wednesday. So
Yes.
there's going to be a little architecture that we've referenced a lot during Spring Office hours. Stay tuned for that, and we'll definitely keep you updated on that.
You had me at barbecue, my friend.
Yes.
um, cool. I created a Supabase Spring Boot starter.
Super boost.
How Supabase? How can I find people to review my open source library? Great question. Go.
Ask me. I'll review it. Send me a link. I'll take a look.
Yeah.
That easy.
Yeah, I would say the social networks. So start on wherever you are, wherever your kind of audience is. If it's on something like Twitter, then just throw a link out there and say, hey, I created this. Is anybody interested in reviewing it? Throw something on Reddit. Go out to any of the communities that you're in. If you're in like a Twitter community or a Facebook group of developers, I know LinkedIn, we're on a Spring LinkedIn group. So find those groups where those types of developers hang out and just throw it out there. You'd be surprised at how many people are interested in the same things that you are and willing to give it a shot. So I would start there and take that feedback to heart and use it to improve the project and go from there. But yeah, go ahead and throw us that link. We'll take a look at it for you.
Yes. Definitely shout out to the Spring developer community on Twitter and the Spring users community on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I have another one here from Mohammed. I have multiple skills around Spring Core tools. The problem is I feel disorganized when I write code, especially when I see the old work from other developers in my company. So I guess my question is, what do you mean disorganized? Like, I didn't see that one. How can I improve my skills regarding the conception and organization of the code in terms of it will fit within the functional business result? Cool. That is a great question. So I think I'm going to kind of generalize this into I know how to write code to make something work. How do I improve that code, right? So there are probably a bunch of books out there that I'm going to forget off the top of my head, but Writing Clean Code is one of them. I'll see if I can get a link to that in the chat. So that is one. Really, you're talking, again, you've made something work. Great. First step. I always do that too. I don't write good code. I write something that works first, and then I kind of step back and say, how can I improve this? One of the ways you can do that is through testing. So write your tests, whether it's before or after. I still write my tests after I write my code. Shame on me, Dan. But through tests, I often find the holes in my code. Like when I start writing these tests, I go, oh, this particular piece of code that I'm trying to test does too many things. Like that's my first hint to go, okay, now I can go ahead and refactor that. So that's one way, through testing. Through two, just kind of looking at other code. So you say you're in an organization, maybe you look up to some other developers in your organization who you feel are writing better code than you. May not be the case, but maybe that's how you feel. Take a look at their code. When you find something, you go, hey, maybe you can ping them and ask them a question. Hey, I see you wrote this block of code this way. I probably would have wrote it this way. How did you end up here? And that usually sparks a good conversation of just how to kind of optimize that one piece of code. So don't take it as this entire application I need to kind of rewrite. Take it a method at a time, a class at a time, and just work your way from there.
That's great advice. Start small.
Cool. What do we got here? We have some more questions. Oh, this one. So I struggle many times about response entity. Please tell me what is it and when I should use it. So I had the same question a lot. So what is this response entity that's being returned from a controller? So if you build out a REST controller and you have a REST controller around like a resource like products, right? Normally you can just say, hey, I want a list of products. So return to me the list of products that are in the system. Sometimes you will see a method returning a response entity instead of the list of products. In that case, if you are manipulating the headers that are being returned, or you're manipulating the status code that is being returned, that's when you need a response entity because you get access to that and you can change that information. If you're not manipulating headers or changing response codes, just return the type itself. So in that case, I'm returning a list of products. I have a video on this, so if you want to learn more about that, head over to youtube.com/@DanVega. Check out that video, and I hope that helps.
Thanks for the interesting answers. Spring Data might be a better fit regarding AI and what might come around the corner in the future. Hey, I'm a developer from Zimbabwe. I'm trying to build an app with Spring Security and JWT authentication. I'm having a hard time trying to authenticate users from an OAuth 2 provider and return tokens. We kind of addressed that earlier in the episode. Take a look at the Spring guides. There is a guide that actually connects to multiple OAuth 2 backends, and that's a great place to start. Look at the guides on spring.io.
Cool.
What do you think of Spring Reactive? Is the extra complexity really worthwhile for simple stateless CRUD applications? Extra complexity. Is there extra complexity when I use Spring Reactive for CRUD? What is that? What is the extra complexity?
Yeah, so I think, when you get into building web apps, you have a choice in Spring, whether you're going to use the imperative style with Spring MVC, or you're going to use reactive style programming with Spring Webflux. And reactive style programming is a different paradigm, different set of code, different things that you got to learn. I mean, you have to learn the different types, the monos and the fluxes, and then you have to learn all the different operators that come with reactive programming. So yes, there is some overhead to it, but there is a reason that we do it. And if you're building high intense web applications that have high throughput, those applications are probably talking to databases or to other services or some type of input output that is blocking. And that blocking is going to cost you in performance. So what happens with reactive is we kind of turn that around and say, instead of blocking this thread on the system, and which is ultimately a operating system thread, instead of blocking this, we're just going to go ahead and let it go. Go do something else while we're waiting for that to return. And when it comes back, then we can go ahead and continue with that execution. So yes, there's some overhead. Yes, it is worth it in the right situations.
Awesome. Ajay gives us a thumbs up. SEU James says, speaking about tests, what do you think is most accurate, unit or integration? I'm not sure that one is more accurate. I think one is easier to get started on. So maybe you should start there with unit tests. But integration tests are also super valid, and you can get a lot of coverage in maybe one test. Like, hey, do all these things work, and have one test to do it. So yeah, it's a balance. It depends.
Yeah, and there's a testing pyramid, as you will, as to like what percentage of tests should you have in your repository. So you have your unit test, you have your integration test, you have your functional kind of end-to-end tests. If you're working in different systems, right? There's a balance there. You cannot have 100% code coverage. You cannot write every single unit test for every component in your system and every single integration test. There's a balance there. You have to find it. But as DaShaun said, they both do different things. Unit tests much faster. Integration tests allow you to find the integration between different components, different services, etc. So I would say take time to write both and find that balance.
Excellent. I think that this is a really good question. We're checking our projects for CVEs every day, as you should. Sometimes there are CVEs in transitive dependencies. How do you handle such CVEs? Because overriding the version in the main POM feels a little wrong. What do you do? I'll tell you, I understand. I feel the same way of like, hey, there's a transitive dependency somewhere down the way. And do I pull that in? Maybe something that's being pulled in from my parent POM. And do I pull that in and override that dependency version? Because I know I'm going to have to change it later once that parent POM updates. But what's the right thing to do? I think if it depends on the severity of that issue. It depends on the severity of that issue. If it's a minimal issue, if it's on your reporting, is it something that you have to address, or do you have that capability to say, hey, this is not affecting us. We don't need to take care of it yet. So you've got to do more analysis on the CVE before you can make a decision. But if it's something that's critical, if it's a critical vulnerability in a dependent or transitive dependency, then you have to do that. Get it taken care of as soon as possible, overwrite the POM, and get it out the door. Alternatively, it depends.
Great. I have another question here. This might be a bad question, but how do you avoid the if else if you are going to implement multiple validations at various steps in business logic? I'm not quite sure what the if else is. If that, do that. I'm not quite sure what scenario you're trying to catch. DaShaun?
Yeah, this is one where that reactive style of programming seems to fit really well. Where, hey, I've got this stream of data, and the data is going to look different, and then you can do your maps on filter by, so that you can handle those types of situations where there's multiple ways that this data needs to be validated or handled in that stream, and that style of programming lends itself well to
Yeah,
those types of
also
situations.
in newer versions of Java, we have pattern matching. So you could always look at the type and then handle the validation based on the type that you're working with. So that could be something to look at as well. Thomas says, Josh Long mentioned CQRS to refactor your code structure. Are there any good resources? What kind of patterns can I use for what kind of problem, especially in Spring with Spring examples? So
Maybe we should start by
CQRS,
addressing what is CQRS.
yeah, CQRS is a particular problem that you're trying to solve. Command query responsibility segregation.
Yes.
It's been a 2 years since I've worked on that project, but I did work on a project that used CQRS. And really, the problem that you're solving here is that if you have a system that is taking a ton of traffic to read data, but maybe not a ton of traffic to write new data, then you separate those kind of services out. So you have one service that is going to take all this load, and you may need to scale out, and you put it in kind of one service to read. Then you have another service to write where maybe there's not as much traffic coming in. Maybe you write a few records a day, but there's tons of systems reading from this data. So there are patterns to kind of deal with CQRS, especially in Spring. I've done a bunch of that in the past. So I don't know of any specifically off the top of my head. Do you, DaShaun?
I have an old favorite. One of our good friends, Kenny Bastani, has a GitHub that is a plethora of knowledge. So I would probably start there. If I was sitting next to you, I'd say, hey, let's go look at Kenny's repository. And I can't think of any projects or guides that address CQRS from the get-go, but it is a very powerful approach. Earlier, we had a question about reactive versus a regular CRUD. How often, when we create that CRUD API for our backend, how often do all of those methods that we implement get used?
Yep.
The idea around CQRS is, hey, today I only care about capturing that email address. So I'm only going to do that right. So there's my command, boom. And later I will aggregate and serve it back or whatever I need to do. But the idea of only doing as much as you need to address that next feature or milestone, CQRS lends itself really well to that type of development approach as well.
Great answer. Just a comment. Wow, glad to catch this live today. Usually I get to watch it later due to local time in India.
Yay.
That is a good point. We should try to switch the times up here and there to make sure we're allowing everyone to catch it live. So thank you. I did not forget this question. It is on my list right here. I make sure that we want to get to it. So this is his question at a glance, but I'm actually going to jump back into my doc. I want to read a little bit more of this question just so we can get an understanding of what he's asking. So most of the projects I see from other big Spring users tend to be packaged by layer. So this is the layer, of course, of like if you have a controller and then you have a model and a service and a repository and config. After doing some research, it seems there are a lot of people arguing that package by feature is better because it keeps things related to the same feature in the same place. For example, instead of separating things into controller, service, repository, it might be by package like user. So in a user package, you might have things like a user entity, a user DTO, controller, service, repository, etc. In the articles I've come across, it seems this argument is that the technique makes it easier to modularize, scale, and reuse down the road. I'm not going to go into everything else, but that is kind of the gist of the question. So just some thoughts on that. The one thing I love about Spring is we don't kind of hold you into any structure. You can kind of structure your code however you want. You could dump a bunch of classes into the root package if you want. Heck, you can dump them outside and make a path scan to that if you wanted to. But this is really up to you and your team. So I think first you have to find the organization that works for the team or the project that you're working on, because based on a huge monolithic application or many, many microservices, that package structure may be different based on that project. So it really is up to the project and the team that you're working on. I tend to write package by layer because a lot of the things I'm working on are smaller. But even when I worked on larger monolithic applications, we used package by layer, and I don't remember seeing a ton of issues with the code organization. As you said, there are probably some pros and cons to both. I can't think of any that would like make me go, well, I need to rewrite this entire application to package by feature because we're going to get some performance gains out of that. I think if you're strictly looking at a performance issue, there are other ways to increase performance other than how you're going to kind of structure your application. Now, I know our good friend Ted talks about structuring his application one way for testability, and there might be ways to structure things so that they're more testable. But when it comes to performance, I don't think that is something that I would worry about. DaShaun?
So I think it's a great question, and it really depends on your scale and your scope, right? If I've got a bunch of features in the same repository, then I will have a user package, a product package, etc. But if I've only got one feature in my repository, my user service, then in that I will have that ordered packaged by layers. But even if I had multiple user and account and product in the same repository, within those packages, user package, product package, then I'm still going to be packaging by layers, to be honest. And it addresses Ted's concern as well. Then I can test based on, hey, I want to test these controllers in this controller package. So I can set my scope, but it's still separated by feature so that at some later point in time when I want to pull things apart, and this is what the Spring Modulus project does. It puts in those guardrails so that you can't reference something from the product package or the product controller from the user package or the user's controller package. So you have those nice separations, lines between your different domains.
Great stuff. Yep. So cool. I hope that answered your question. And sorry we didn't get to it last week. Okay, another question. Is there some good guide for reactive Spring security to implement JWT-based authentication? So I don't know if there's anything specific to reactive. I don't know that. So everything I've done with JWTs is using the built-in OAuth 2 resource server. I don't think that's specific to imperative or reactive. I could be wrong. But I think you should be able to take a look at some of the tutorials that I've done and just convert those over to a reactive web app.
I'd also take a look. Anytime I hear somebody that's trying to do anything with Reactive Spring, I'd say look at Josh Long's book, Reactive Spring. It's the book.
He literally wrote the book on
He
Reactive.
wrote the book.
Cool. Let me see here. Is it possible to read directly a request body in a controller advice? I've read that the request body can be read just once. So yes, that is a Java servlet thing. So if you are working with the servlet request, once you read in the request body, it's done. You can't read it again. I went down this road building something in Spring Security and a filter. I was trying to read the request body in a filter, and there is a class in Spring that will allow you to kind of get around this. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But yes, long story short, you can only read it once. Now, I'm not sure what you would want to read it again for. So like especially in a controller, right? In a controller, you're probably delegating to something to do something with that request. So you're saying, hey, send this off to a repository and persist it to a database, right? So I don't know that you're reading it and then doing something else with it. So I'd be curious to know what the use case is.
Yeah, I can imagine. Maybe I have different bodies that are being sent in, and I want to send to a different controller. But in that case, we should maybe rely on our data types. What type are we sending in? So it doesn't have to be at the controller device. It could be handled by the annotations.
Cool. Hello, Mohammed.
Welcome.
Well, this one, I'm ready for this.
We're going to answer this every day, every week. We're going to answer this question.
Do you think Project Loom will have an impact on Reactive Spring? If so, how? The answer to that is yes, but there is still a world where Spring MVC and the imperative type of programming and Spring Web Flux and the reactive style programming both need to exist. So if you're doing streams-based processing, then you're still going to need reactive programming in something like Spring Web Flux. But Project Loom is going to help us when it comes to traditional Spring MVC apps that talk to a database, that talk to another service, that do these blocking operations. And it's going to help us a lot with that performance of not tying up these threads. So Project Loom is here to really help out our Spring MVC apps, but that does not mean anything when it comes to Reactive. Reactive is still going to have a use case.
As I look out into the not too distant future, and I think about where I'm going to be using threads versus virtual threads versus reactive, my world's not going to change with Project Loom. A lot of the thread management, a lot of the thread creation and management is handled by my connection pools, the things where I'm connecting to the database, and that logic is probably still going to be handled by my connection pools. So my world's not going to change. So whether I've chosen to go down the imperative or the reactive approach, I'm probably still going to go down that path. I'm not going to go back and change any decisions that I've made once Project Loom becomes GA.
Great. I meant other patterns different than CQRS. How do you find out what kind of patterns to use? All Spring Boot books and resources I could find don't really easily talk about this. And yeah, I don't think you're going to find a specific Spring Boot book that talks about all the different architecture patterns in software development. So this is where you need to kind of move up the chain and go a little bit more general. There are great books out there on architecture and software development. And inside of those books, you'll find different patterns. And then, just figuring out how to apply them in Spring is really just now a language construct or a framework construct, right? So any pattern that kind of exists out there, you should be able to apply in Spring, and it's just really understanding the pattern at a high level first. I'm trying to think what I was just looking back at my bookshelf here. There are a couple.
I'm going to pop up some of these. No worries. Thanks for perspectives. Much appreciated. Yes, parameter headers are much easier to access than the body.
That's exactly what I ended up doing in my Spring Security filter. I was like, I can just pass this via a header, and I'm going to pull that out of the header instead of having to mess with reading the body twice. So great comment. Cool. Here's another one. I'd like to revisit a question I asked earlier so I can get more helpful response. Recently, I completed the Spring in Action book. Great choice, by the way. And I've also been doing front-end work with Vue.js people. I'm a Vue.js people. I like that.
Yep.
Keep advising me to work on projects to improve my skills, but my concern is that simply making something functional doesn't necessarily make a better programmer. Instead, I want to learn, I don't see, oh, there we go. Experienced developers and see how they structure their code and projects. Have you any suggestions for me? So yeah, I think specifically, again, I think there's a couple routes to this. I think internally, if you're in an organization where you have larger teams or you have teammates, anybody on your team that you consider to have more experience than you, that has been doing this longer, or you think is writing better code than you, as I said, it might not always be the case. Take a look at what they're writing and ask them questions. Hey, I saw that you wrote this method. What was your thought process behind this? Why did you do this? Get on code reviews in your organization. Code reviews are a great way to learn about the projects that you're working on and other projects within your organizations. Like, you get some more clarity as to what other people are building in your organization. Then that's a great opportunity to go, I don't understand why you wrote that piece of code there. What is that supposed to do? Please explain that to me. And just through kind of those things, doing the repetitions, doing the reps every day, that's going to help. If you don't have that, then you can start reaching out to, people who are creating content online. So if there's a YouTuber like a Dan Vega who's creating videos around something, and you see that they do something a certain way, that you can kind of pick up and learn from that and ask questions around that. Go out to GitHub projects that you want to get involved in. So there's a Spring Pet Clinic, microservices architecture project that we talked about earlier. Jump into that, see how that code is getting written, raise an issue and go, hey, why did this particular set of code get written this way? So I think there are lots of ways. I do think it takes time too. If you're looking for a shortcut, there really isn't one. Put in the reps, as DaShaun said. It's going to take some time, but I think if you're doing the work, asking the right questions, learning from the code that you're writing or reading, that would be my advice.
I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I want to address this one. How can Spring help us building modular monoliths? I threw a little banner. You want to take a look at the Spring Modular project right here. Go take a look at that, and that will put in those guardrails so that you can't reference outside of your package. So you can do that feature-based development in a monolithic repository, but delivering modulith services. And I also, the rest of my family, I'm on vacation. The rest of my family is begging me to cut this short. So I'm going to leave, and I'm going to let everybody else continue, hang out, enjoy. I'm going to be jumping on the live stream, and I will be answering questions, but I'm going to step away from the camera. Thank you, everybody, so much. This has been wonderful. Dan,
I'm going to keep answering questions, so stick around.
All right. Whoops.
All right. Oh, yep. There you go. All right, so let's keep going through some of these questions here. There was a question on a controller. I have a controller device where I handle most of my errors, so I want to collect most of the request/response data in order to log it and save it. One data required is the request body. That's why I asked. Gotcha. That makes sense. But you should be able to, again, if you're just logging it, yeah, it really depends what you're doing there. Let me take that question offline and see if I know I've done something like this before. You probably don't have to read that twice. Let me think about that. Is it possible to ignore bean null values and not include it in an update statement when calling the JPA repository save method? So is it possible to ignore bean null values? So there, I think this really depends on what the database constraints are too, right? So if I have So if I have like a date updated column in my database, and I can have null values in there, then I should be able to set that to null and persist that off. But if the database column says not null, then you need to have something in there. I believe that is what you're asking. If that's not, let me know. Jack says there's a great repo in GitHub where there are examples of all patterns. That's awesome. If you have an example of that, Jack, please go ahead and share that. Hey, great work, kind sirs. A little bit off topic. In your opinion, will AI replace 100% software developers? So great question. This is obviously big in the news lately, and I got a question about this a couple weeks ago, and I answered it in a short, but I'd be happy to talk about this again. The long-term answer is nobody knows the answer to that question, right? In short term, 5-10 years, the answer is no. So the way I would look at this is first think about what you do as a software developer every single day. If you go in and write code for 12 hours a day or 8 hours a day, and then you go home, maybe that could be replaced. But I know, at least in past positions that I was in, especially as you start doing this more in your career, you are really there to solve problems. And solving problems is really a people thing, right? This is your soft skills as a developer. You're meeting with teams, you're trying to understand problems, you're trying to find ways to solve them. You're not just writing code. You're really trying to talk to people who have stakes in these projects, understand what's wrong, and come up with solutions to these. Then it's, developing a solution to that problem, and then finally, writing some code that kind of solves that problem. So I would say no to that because there's so much more involved in creating software than just writing code. But even at just a code level, the system right now, the AI systems out there can do some things well. They can't write entire projects to kind of up-to-date standards. So I know something like ChatGPT is, its data set is at the end of 2021. So if you start asking it about like Spring Boot 3 stuff, it won't be able to write that. Obviously, those data sets are going to get better and improve, and we'll see. We'll see what happens from that. But I would say short term, no way. Long term, still probably not. I think you as a software developer just really need to evolve. Like when times change, you got to keep up to date. And where can I provide most value? And my most value is being able to work well with others. So I look at it like that. So I hope that answers that question. All right. I would like to create a test container for a database. Do you have a tutorial about it? I don't have one specifically. I know DaShaun just did a live, I believe, a live session with some of the folks at Test Containers, but there is if you look on the Test Containers website, there are examples of how to do this. So in a Spring Boot app, if you wanted to use something like Postgres, it's fairly simple to do. You can just create a special JDBC URL in your application.properties or application.yaml using that special TC, and that will actually turn that into a container as you're writing your tests. I will get something out there though. I've done talks on test containers. I just don't have anything on my channel. So I just definitely need to get something up there, but it is, test containers is awesome, especially for that scenario, being able to test a database. That's really a great scenario for it. What is more important for finding a new job? The ability to solve algorithmic tasks or know technologies, frameworks, and tools. Yeah, the answer is yes to both. I would say, again, we talked about this earlier, the algorithmic problems that you're going to be faced with at some of the larger companies, you're going to need to know that stuff if you want to get into those companies. I would say, as in general, it's more important to be able to understand how to solve problems. And those questions really help people evaluate, because you got to remember, people that are interviewing you have an hour to kind of assess if you're going to be a good fit. And one of the best ways to do that is by asking you questions that make you think about how to solve a problem. And really, the insight is, I don't really care if you end up at the right answer. What I care about is your thought process as you're going through this question. Like, how do I solve this? What are the things I need to do to solve this problem? When we're interviewing you, that's what we want to see. We want to see your thought process. So I would say there is a very good combination there. I would start with, how do I solve problems? Depending on where you're trying to get a job, how much of that is going to be kind of algorithmic question based. But two, if we're a Spring Boot shop and we work with Postgres databases, like, those things you need to know. And if we're asking you basic Java and Spring Boot questions, those are things that you should understand as well. So being well-rounded, but being able to problem solve first, and then language and frameworks, technology stack second. Spring Native deployed as a function, AWS Lambda, ? Great question. So you can, so the only thing is with AWS, so right now, currently AWS only supports Java 11 if you're using their runtime. If you wanted to create a native executable, you could target a specific platform. So you need to target the platform that AWS is running on, and you'd have to basically, there is a way to do that. What I'm getting at is there's an easier way to do that on AWS right now with something called SnapStart. If all you're doing the native executable for is to improve performance, you can get a lot of those performance gains out of something called AWS SnapStart, which basically takes a snapshot of the Firecracker VM when it's created, and then uses that the next time that it needs to go ahead and perform, start up. Instead of cold starting from zero, it starts from the SnapStart. And so that will give you a lot of performance gains out of the box. They set up to 10 times faster for Java developers. So if you haven't looked at that, go ahead and take a look at that. Jay, I do not know the answer to this. In a Spring Data JDBC, how do I override the save method in the repository to make use of Oracle sequence as a primary key? So I'm confused on why you would do this in the save method. If you're using a sequence, I believe, like in the entity itself, where you're defining the ID, that is where you want to define the sequence. So I'm a little confused. If I have that wrong, please do me a favor and reach out to me on Twitter and at the real Dan Vega there. Send me a repo of just an example of what you're facing there, and I'll see if I can't take a look at that. What happened today? This is not the usual time for live. No, it is not. You missed it. DaShaun is on vacation, so we had to move this up and just do this at a different time. Oh no, I don't know what's happened, but it is too hot in here and my camera has overloaded. Let me see if I can switch cameras. All right, so we're going to probably move to different view here. Yes, now we're on the laptop camera. Oh boy, different view. All right, we're improvising here, folks, because the camera has overheated. That's crazy. So I'm going to answer a couple more questions and then we'll call it a day. As you can see, my bookshelf back here, just a different view of the office here. Let me see. Hello from Quebec. Thank you. 5 months ago, I switched from my job from Android to Spring Boot. It's been a good experience so far. All I missed so far is Kotlin. Why isn't it catching on? Why isn't Kotlin catching on? I believe it is. Kotlin's pretty big. I know in the Spring community, I see a lot of it, so I'm not sure what you're talking about. What do you think makes someone a good developer? I think, so again, a kind of well-rounded developer. You have to have soft skills. This is not just an industry where you're writing code every day. This is, you're going to be on a team. At least I know when I was interviewing people, I'm interviewing people, not developers, right? Like, is this someone I want to work with? So I think people skills are really good. Soft skills are good. And then just someone who I think enjoys what they do. You want to, especially, well, not as much these days because we're not around everyone, but at least when I was in the offices, like, these are people I want to be around every day. So yeah, I think that's it. What do you think about storing files in a database? Are there pros and cons to storing them in a file system? I think Transaction Manager is a cool pro for DBMS, and so we used both approaches in a project. Yeah, you can. We've stored kind of image blobs before. I'd say more or less these days. There are probably, again, pros and cons to each. I haven't done a lot of this lately, so I'm not an expert on this particular topic. But definitely more of what I've done in the past is let's store this on a file system somewhere, especially with something like S3 available. I've always kind of just dumped it there. Okay, just seeing if there are any other ones I can really get to real quick. What is preferred, constructor injection versus field injection? So I've actually done a video on this. If you're interested, head over to youtube.com/@danvega. Constructor injection is the preferred dependency injection method. There are a bunch of reasons why. Testing is probably number one on my list. Because field injection uses reflection, then it gets kind of weird to like mock things out. So constructor injection is preferred. It actually says it in the Spring documentation. So where possible, use constructor injection. All right. Senior video on ChatGPT, but can you please make another video on how we can create a training model using Spring Boot models? I do not have any experience writing training models using Spring Boot models. So that is not something I will be able to create a video on anytime soon. But when I pick up that skill, I assure you I will. Okay, with my camera going berserk, and now I'm on my laptop camera, I think this is a good place to call it. There's some questions that I didn't get to, especially in the mailbag. We have a lot of questions still in the mailbag. We're going to find a better way for you guys to submit questions to the mailbag that we can go through each week. But for now, I'm just kind of manually collecting them into this mailbag. I have a bunch more to go through. I have a few in here that I didn't get to that I will go ahead and add to that mailbag. And we'll pick this up again next week, same day, back to our regular time next week. So Tuesday, 3:30 Eastern. We'll get to that, and we'll see I'll get that scheduled soon. We'll see what topic we're going to get to next week. But these questions have been a lot of fun. So maybe we'll just get back to this again. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to spend with us. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone out there, and we will see you next week. See you, friends.